Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
Hello, old sports, and welcome to the Hello, Old Sports podcast on the Sports History Network. The NFL season is upon us. I'm Dan Newman, joined by my brother and co-host Andrew Newman, and we are here to do a little bit something, I guess, a little bit different tonight, maybe something a little bit quicker. And we'll get into that in a moment. But before that, Andrew, how are you doing on this fine September Eve?
I am doing pretty well, except for what you just mentioned, which is that the NFL season has started and is as close to over as it can conceivably be after one game for our beloved New York Giants. But, other than that, I have my health.
What is it, Seinfeld with George Costanza, where he just goes, I'm sick of health. Health is not doing it. Like he's like something happened, like his girlfriend broke up with him, or he lost his job, and Jerry goes, oh, at least you have your health. He goes, I'm sick of health. I'm not accepting health anymore. So,
well, I'll take nice weather then too. How about that? It's nice weather out as well. I just went to the side to crack my window. Right outside this window here, we have chickens and a rooster. But I think this late at night,
yes, you do. So
I think this late at night, they probably won't be a factor. So I can crack the window.
Yeah, Andrew lives in a very interesting neighborhood in that, like, it's like a lot of new stuff, but then a lot of people who have been there for decades and decades. So you get a high-rise apartment and a new restaurant and bar across the street, and then on the other side of the street you got a lady raising chickens. So
it's just, I mean, she's not raising them, she just has them. She's not like teaching them about morality or anything. We just are, my apartment faces the back of is backward facing in the building, so it faces away from the street, so our windows just basically face into the parking lot or into this woman's yard. So
this year is the 100th season of the New York Football Giants, who were founded in 1925 by Tim Mara, a legal bookmaker in New York.
Which was a legal occupation at the time.
Yeah, every time they mention that, they always make sure to point that out. There's Tim Mara, who was a bookmaker, which was a legal occupation at the time. I don't know, like, what they think
it is again, for the record.
Well, it's sort of. I don't think you could just open up shop and be your own bookmaker, but nonetheless. So, and we'll get to the meat of things. It's always funny to me that these places, they can't even wait another year. It's sort of like when they had to insist that WrestleMania 25 was the 25th anniversary of WrestleMania, even though it was the 24th anniversary of WrestleMania. It's like they couldn't even wait one more year till it was the 100th anniversary. They had to, as soon as they could do it, they had to roll out the 100th year of the Giants, which is fine because, you love the history and I love the history. And they've done a bunch of stuff. I think they at the game this past weekend, I think they had a bunch of old players and coaches back for the history, and they had a dinner or something the night before. They had a Giants 100-year celebration day at Yankee Stadium a couple weeks ago, which is frankly just kind of strange, but so be it. I guess the Giants once played at one of the previous Yankee stadiums, so maybe that was the hook. But they also put out a couple of these lists or that type of thing. So I thought maybe usually we are very sort of proactive in that we research things and we tell the story of one thing or another. We put together a list. But I thought it would be kind of cool to just take a little bit of time here and maybe look at what they did for some of the Giant 100th anniversary lists and that type of thing, and just kind of give our thoughts on it.
Yeah. Then I have not really prepared anything in terms of anything that I wouldn't already have an opinion on or be able to speak to sort of freely as it is. And they did the bracket of the top plays. They revealed that kind of week by week a few months ago. The top 100 players, they were doing 10 at a time the last 10 weeks. Like that just ended last week. They just came out with the top number 10 through number 1, like I think a week ago today. So, that's still relatively fresh.
So just so everybody's aware, why don't we go through this real quick? Number 100, Rich Seubert. Number 99, Brett.
We're not going to read all of these, are we?
No,
At least not like that. Like,
so really what I would say to everybody is just go to giants.com/100 and you can really find all this stuff. So why don't we start? Let's talk a little bit first about the top 100 players list. Like you said, they kind of rolled it out in various I think the first week they put out 2 groups of 10, and then every subsequent week they put out subsequent groups of 10 until just this past week they did the final 10, and there was no fan voting. It was all just by a panel of journalists and historians and former players and that type of thing. And so, guys at the bottom, you start to realize that there really isn't, especially, even in the NFL with their large rosters, some of the guys towards the bottom of the top 100 are really guys that you wouldn't think of as all-time great Giants. I mentioned that Rich Seubert was number 100. He was a solid part of the Super Bowl 42 team on the offensive line of the Giants. Right after him was Brad Benson, who was an offensive tackle, a Pro Bowl offensive tackle on the 86 Giants. Some of the guys that were more towards the bottom, Lawrence Tynes, the kicker on both the 2007 and 2011 team, was the kicker was number 91. Howard Cross, a longtime blocking tight end for the Giants, was 88. So those were sort of some of the guys who populated the sort of the bottom levels. Once you got up into the 20s and especially into the teens, you got the guys who were really kind of the well-known Giants, the guys who were in the Hall of Fame, that type of thing. And kind of like the top, 10 to 15, I guess, is what you'd consider the elite.
I don't know. I think you could go down to about 20 and consider those guys elite, maybe even 25. The list of the committee, by the way, was, and I read most of these names I recognize. It was Bob Papa, who was the chairman, Pete Abitante, which is a name I don't recognize, Ernie Accorsi, longtime GM, and with the Giants, and guy who's been in the league for a very long time.
Guy who knows a lot of football history, Accorsi.
Yeah, Judy Batista, who's also been a writer around the Giants for a long time. John Birdie, who I believe is a relief pitcher for the Yankees.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Linda Cohn, Vinny DiTrani with the Bergen Record for a long time. Bob Glauber, who's a long-time football writer in New York. Joe Horrigan, which is a name I'm not familiar with.
Joe Horrigan is actually the former president of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, or something like that. I've actually heard him speak at PFRA conventions, and he's written some books and stuff. So he's a solid name.
Jay Horwitz, who I think was the Mets PR guy for a long time.
That's got to be who that is. Yeah.
Peter King, Gary Myers, former Hello Old Sports guest.
Yes.
Paul Schwartz, who's been a Giants writer for the Post for 20 years now, and then George Willis, who I believe also either is or definitely was with the New York Post. So mostly writers. And, look, with a few of these exceptions here, like a guy like, somebody who was a Pro Football Hall of Fame president, very few of them are going to be able to speak intelligently about football in the 20s and 30s and early 40s, right? But when you have writers there, you can at least get a good picture going back maybe to the 60s, 70s, 80s. The problem when you use former players or current players, and I'm not talking about the current Giants, I'm just talking about anything where you use like current players. The current players most of them are in their 20s or 30s. They're not going to know much beyond the era they've played in and maybe the generation they grew up in. And really, the former players aren't any better because for the most part, even if whether it was a guy who played in the 80s, he's only really going to be able to speak to the 80s, maybe a little before that, maybe a little after that. And, every generation is like that. So something like this where you're looking to, and I think they did a very good job with this, to span all of the eras. You almost can't use anybody who's not, anybody who's like a player or anything like that.
And that's one of the complaints you always hear when people talk about, for instance, like the Baseball Hall of Fame and the Veterans Committee is, well, we're using former players. It's like, yeah, you're using former players, but why does Joe Torre know anything more about 19th century baseball or Negro League baseball or that type of thing? Like, you or I would probably be better qualified for that committee than Joe Torre is to assess whether, Home Run Johnson or, Bill Dolan from the 1890s belongs in the Hall of Fame. Like, so you understand why they do it the way they do it, but you're right. It does, it's nice to see it. It wasn't like, oh, well, we got to get Lawrence Taylor around this panel or that type of thing.
And the other thing they didn't do with this, which is, a lot of like the Baseball Hall of Fame doesn't go this route, but sometimes these kinds of things go this route. And I've run into it like when we were putting our all-time starting nines together in baseball, is some of them do one of two things. Is they'll go, oh, okay, like if you lined up Mel Hine against Lawrence Taylor, who do you think Lawrence Taylor's not a good example because he was in front of all of them, but like if you went like, oh, if you lined up Mel Hine and tried to get him to block Michael Strahan, what do you think would happen? It's like, yeah, of course, the modern era guy is a better athlete than a guy from the 30s, but that's not what we're talking about here. And the other one too, and I'm sensitive to this argument in the abstract, but is when guys will do, and it's more with baseball than with football, you'll see somebody be like, well, I don't really put any players on there who are pre-integration. And it's like, first of all, you're not solving baseball's long racial history by doing that. And second of all, then just don't do the list. Like, just nobody's forcing you to do this. If you're going to do it and be like, well, I'm not including anybody who was who played in a segregated era, it's like, okay, then you're not really doing the thing you're saying you're doing. You know what I mean?
Well, and that's the thing. It's like you either enjoy it or you don't. Like, it's like if you don't, if you're not going to enjoy what's being discussed, then like you said, just don't do it. And, my argument with some of the stuff with the pre-integration with the baseball is like, when was baseball fully integrated? Was Jackie Robinson, Jackie Robinson played in a segregated league for the first couple of years of his career. Do we not count Jackie Robinson? So yeah, I agree. You really have to be willing to consider the entirety of the history of everything if you're going to truly, do it. So let's just look at this Giants list sort of. Now, number one was Lawrence Taylor. I don't think there was ever going to be any question about that.
Did you hear what he said to Carl Banks at halftime on Sunday?
I did not.
So Banks was on because Carl Banks is the color guy for the Giants for years now on WFAN. And they do a podcast, him and Bob Papa, and I think Paul DiTito might be on it, where, they've become a little bit of Giants apologists on the current era, to be honest. Banks said that I guess LT said something to him at halftime when they honored the top 100 guys at halftime of the game this past Sunday. LT said something to Banks like, we could grab 22 of these guys and put a better effort than these guys are doing. So LT was trying to round up the troops for maybe the 86 Giants to play instead of the 2024 Giants, and would not have gotten much worse, I guess you could say. But LT clearly number one, clearly, the best player in Giants history. It's not particularly close. LT probably this is so tough with when you do the whole NFL with eras and offense versus defense, but LT probably one of the top 5 professional football players of all time, you would think.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that LT is probably he's definitely the best defensive player at all time. I think in the NFL, football is tough because, quarterbacks tend to be so dominant, especially over the last 40 or 50 years, that you can probably make a list that includes the quarterbacks as sort of the first 5 or 6 guys on the list. But yeah, I mean, and it's funny sometimes when you hear about sort of New York sports legends, you hear about Namath, you hear about a lot of Yankees, you hear about a couple of Mets, obviously guys from the Giants and Dodgers, you hear about some Knicks, and even like a Messier type. But for whatever reason, a lot of times when you talk about New York sports legends, a lot of time Lawrence Taylor doesn't get included in all of that.
Which, when you're talking about post, let's not include the Giants and Dodgers for a minute, the baseball Giants and Dodgers.
Mm-hmm.
The only one of the current teams that has anybody comparable to LT is the Yankees.
Yeah.
I mean, LT goes in the discussion with like Ruth and Mantle and Gehrig, in terms of how good they were within their sport. But some of it, I think, is probably, that LT is still alive and is not, not led a real sterling post-career. There have been worse ones, of course, but, he's had some embarrassing incidents. So I think the desire to lionize him, if you come out with a glowing column about Lawrence Taylor, even if you're talking about his playing career, and then the next day he gets in trouble for a DUI or something like that, which is not out of the realm of possibility with him, you kind of look like a jerk. So, I think that's maybe the reason that the fawning praise isn't constantly there for him like it is for guys who are gone.
Yeah, and I also do think that defense is a little tough. How many defensive players, maybe you want to say like some of the steel curtain guys, but for the most part, you don't hear sort of defensive guys having kind of, a lot of cultural or historical resonance. But yeah, so number 2 was Roosevelt Brown, who was an offensive tackle. He played on the team from 1953 to 1965. He was one of the few. There were a few, but he was one of the few guys who was on every single team that to the NFL championship game. There were 6 between 1956 and 1963. He was the first. Number 3 was Mel Hine, who was a center and linebacker for the team, played for the team for 15 seasons, which only 2 guys have played more than 15 seasons for the Giants. And those 2 guys are Eli Manning and Michael Strahan. Number 4, Frank Gifford. Number 5, Michael Strahan. Number 6, Emlyn Tunnell, who was the first Black Giant, also the first Black player elected into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Great defensive back on the team of the 1950s. 7 was Harry Carson, the linebacker for the Giants, who was, when the Giants won in 86, he was one of the guys who had been sort of a long-suffering Giant. He'd been on the team through a lot of the dark years in the mid and late 70s. He's in the Hall of Fame. Number 8 is Eli Manning. Number 9 is Sam Huff. And number 10 is Andy Robustelli, the Hall of Fame linebacker and defensive lineman with those same teams. He also was on the 6 conference championship teams that, as was Huff for that matter. So 3 guys, Robustelli, Huff, and Roosevelt Brown, all of whom are in the Hall of Fame and all of whom were on all 6 conference championship teams between 56 and 63.
Yeah, and they're a big part of why they were in all those NFL title games in that 8-year span, and obviously they only won the 1. I don't think there's any arguments between 2 and 3 should have been 2 and 3. I guess you could have flipped the order they were in, but Roosevelt Brown, Mel Hine should have been 2 and 3. Then you get some sort of bunching up. I was wondering what they were going to do with Eli Manning, You certainly could have talked me into maybe one or two spots higher, and I wouldn't have thought it was outrageous. Because, like you said, he is the quarterback position, especially the quarterback position now in the era Eli Manning played in, is so much more important than anywhere else on the field. That a borderline Hall of Famer who won 2 Super Bowls, and, we don't need to go through part and parcel of his career, but, was the MVP of both of those games, made big plays in both of those games. Even if in terms of stature within the history of football at his position, he's not as high up there as some of these guys are, he deserves to be somewhere in that 5 to 10 range, even if he is a borderline Hall of Famer above some of these guys who are clearly Hall of Famers.
Yeah, I would have put him over Carson. Carson, who's in the Hall of Fame and probably deserves to be, but he was somebody who it took him a long time to get into the Hall of Fame, so much so that he actually asked to be taken off the ballot, and they didn't do that, and they eventually elected him. He's somebody I would probably put Eli above him because, while he was a very good player, I don't think Harry Carson was anybody's idea of a dominant defensive player. So I would probably put Eli over Carson. Emlyn Tunnell is a little tougher because Tunnell was a right-away Hall of Famer. But I think they basically got the top 10 right with maybe a few tweaks here and there.
Yeah, I was a little surprised that Sam Huff wasn't higher. I guess maybe because he only played half his career with the Giants.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
Him. And whether they'll admit it or not, that he really associated himself more with the Redskins the whole rest of his life. Was always very bitter about his Giants tenure, the way it ended. But I was expecting him to be a little bit higher. I guess at first you think Strahan is recency bias, but I guess it's not where he is.
No, I mean, he was a great defensive player. He was a first ballot Hall of Famer, I believe, and he
wasn't first. I think he got in on his second ballot.
Okay, but I don't think towards the end of his career anybody doubted that he was a Hall of Famer. Stats are so hard in the NFL, but he was a 4-time All-Pro. I actually think that Strahan might have been a little lower had he not come back for that final year where they won the championship. I think he might have been down closer to a guy I want to talk about in a minute in Tiki Barber. But yeah, I mean, the other thing too, I guess I would say is if you look at sort of the next few guys, and it's 3 quarterbacks in a row. It's actually, it's 3 quarterbacks in a row. It's Phil Simms, Y.A. Tittle, and Charlie Connerly. Those are 3 quarterbacks. So I don't know that you would put Strahan. I don't know if you'd put any of those guys above Strahan. So I think it basically makes sense. Couple guys I want to kind of run by you here. Phil Simms, 11. For a guy who's not a Hall of Famer, you feel like that's almost a little high. But given how associated he was with that team, plus the amazing Super Bowl he had in the 1986 season, I feel like they didn't want to have Phil Simms in the top 10, but they knew they needed to have him close. I also wonder, frankly, if the fact that he was number 11 made them sort of feel like, okay, 11 fits for Phil Simms.
I would think that's possible, especially the way they grouped all 3 of those quarterbacks, because you could make different arguments for all of them. I think the longevity for Simms really helps. Obviously the first couple of years of his career, he was hurt a lot. There were some ups and downs, but really from 1984 through 1990, and then again in 93, he was their quarterback during their best sustained run ever, really, if you think about it, because they won the 2 championships. If you wanted to say 56 to 63 might have been a better sustained run. Okay. A, they had 2 different quarterbacks during that era. The next 2 guys down the list.
Yeah. Tittle and Connerly.
And B, they won the 2 Super Bowls. Simms is weird because I think he doesn't get enough credit for 1990 when they were 11-2 or 12-2. No, 11. They went 13-3. Yeah, they were 11-2 when he was injured in that game against Buffalo. It's almost like he wasn't on that team. Like he doesn't get enough credit for that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he wasn't there for the championship run. So it's like, he like that's tough to calibrate. There's arguments that people make that's what kept him out of the Hall of Fame because who's won 2 Super Bowls and isn't in. And I think that's probably the truth. Whether it should be the truth or not, I don't know. But I think that is probably the truth. And I think also the fact that, he was the starting quarterbacks on those teams, but those were teams that were built around defense and power running to the extent possible. And there was a lot of, throwing to the tight end on 3rd and 6 kind of thing. But he was still the quarterback and leader of those teams. So you're right. I think 11 feels about right for Phil Simms.
A couple of these that feel a little high. Tiki Barber feels high at 14, but I know it's not high. It just feels high because he's not considered sort of an all-time legend of the team, even though the guy ran for over 10,000 yards as a Giant. He's second all-time in touchdowns. The way that he left the team and even some of his antics afterwards probably are what lead me to feel like, okay, he doesn't deserve to be quite so high, but he feels high, but he's probably not.
No, he's their all-time leading rusher. In the very end of his career were the best years of his career, really, ironically, when Coughlin was there. And he really, from like 02 to 06, he was a really, really good back. He had the fumbling problem, which really got corrected the last few years. 2005, he was phenomenal. I think to the extent that he's ranked a little higher than you think, if he's ranked higher than he deserves to be, and I don't know if he is, but if he is, I would say that's because they wanted to show they didn't have an axe to grind.
But it's not the team, though. It's these historians doing it.
A lot of whom are associated with the team or
Fair.
feel a sense of loyalty to the team. If you're doing a list like this, for the most part, it's guys who are in, like Bob Papa is a Giants employee.
True.
Ernie Accorsi is, I don't know if he's still under any kind of contract with the Giants. He really ought not be after the last thing he had a significant decision-making authority over.
Which was?
The hiring of their last general manager.
Oh, the Hog Molly's guy. What's his name?
Gettleman.
Yeah, that's it.
But I think he also was a very, very good back. And I think around where he is justified, to be honest. He was the early 2000s, he was excellent. He probably had a little more football in. This is not the place for it, where I'm of very conflicting feelings about his relationship with the franchise now. I think he deserved a lot of what he got and could not have looked like a bigger clown when they won the Super Bowl the next year. But at the same token, it's 15 years later. We have been put on hard times, and maybe we should appreciate some of the Tiki Barber, for all of his flaws. Maybe we should be a little more appreciative of.
Mark Bavaro at 18, I think, is a little high.
Yeah, and I would say that this one is probably this one. It would be a little sentimentality, I think, because first of all, he was on the team, 6 years, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90.
Yeah.
By 90, he's really, like, I didn't realize until this year or a couple of years ago that they didn't really get rid of him after 90. He was so hurt he was never going to play in 91 anyway, and he didn't.
Yeah.
So I think when I was a kid, I thought the Giants just jettisoned him, and that's really not what happened.
Yeah, you figure he had 1,001 yards in 86. That was the year he was all pro. He was all pro again in 87 with 867 yards, but that was in the strike season, which you've got to figure he would have, in 3 more games, he would have gotten 133 yards. 88, he only played in 16 games, all down to 672. And then 89, he's hurt 7 games, 278. And then in 90, he plays 15 games. And I think the thing is, I actually don't think he was hurt for that 16th game. I actually think he got suspended for putting his hands on a ref.
Yeah, in that Eagle game, the game they lost, he got into it and touched a ref, and I think might have been suspended for the following game against. Well, he wasn't suspended for the San Francisco game, I don't think. So maybe it eventually came down.
Or maybe he was hurt one game, but he did put his hands on a ref, which is just so funny because he was known as such a stoic, almost like a Lou Gehrig type guy, and yet he was, putting his hands on a ref.
There was no call to be manhandling officials.
But you figure in 7 games in 89, he had 278 yards. And then in more than twice as many games the following year, he only had only about 100, a little bit more than 100 yards. So, yeah, 90 at 27 years of age, he's basically in a full-on decline. So, I think a lot of it is what he meant to the franchise, and I totally am on board and agree with that, but feels a little high. The other one that, and especially when you got at 23, 5 shots down, you got Del Schaffner, who was with the Giants for basically the same basic period of time. Schaffner, who was with the Giants for 7 years, and in the 60s, mind you, had 3 seasons of over 1,100 yards receiving. Incidentally, Del Schaffner passed away in 2020 and was somebody we spoke about on the 2020 Hello Old Sports in memoriam, but there does seem like there's sort of a little bit of, I don't know if you want to call it recency bias or sort of love for Mark Bavaro, but being number 18 feels a little high for him.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't even think it's a recency bias because he hasn't been there for 35 years. I think it's like a sentimentality bias.
Yeah.
It's like a symbolism bias. I'm not taking a shot at you, but this is a group of people who are predominantly sports writers. Who does every sports writer in the world idolize?
Mickey Mantle?
Bruce Springsteen.
Oh, okay. I'm going to Springsteen on Friday night.
We'll get home Thursday. Which football player is most evocative of Bruce Springsteen?
Yeah, no, you're right. And look, if you're a Giant fan, you almost have to love Mark Bavaro, but he's a little high here, I think.
Yeah, and just to compare him to Schaffner, I lived in New York for a time, and I remember when Y.A. Tittle was throwing passes to Del Schaffner.
You're quoting Richard Nixon. Fran Tarkenton at 33 felt high. He only played on the Giants 4 years. I think if his name was Joe Smith and he had those 4 years with the Giants, he never would have been that high. I think he's getting a lot of credit for things he did when he was with the Vikings on either side of those 4 years with the Giants.
And I think they were exciting those few years. It was sort of the middle of their oasis period. The Tarkenton Giants, 1 year they went 7-7. 1 year I think they went 9-5, and they just missed the playoffs. Tarkenton in the History of the Giants DVD that I have is quoted as, or he's not quoted as, he says it, that the one team his first year with the Giants going 7-7 was like his greatest career achievement because that team should have won 3 or 4 games. Mm-hmm. But yeah, 4 years, no playoff appearances. I don't object to him being on this list, but probably in the 60s or something like that. You're right. It's, were his numbers significantly? Yeah, you're right. I think he's way too high, although I would put him on the list, but he's one ahead of Jesse Armstead.
And then the other one that I was a little bit surprised on, and this is sort of my last one, and then I don't know if you have any points. Jeremy Shockey at 48 felt a little high too. I know he had some incredible years, but I don't know. That was another one where 6 years with the Giants, right? And he was hurt for the Super Bowl run in 2007. I don't know. Again, you're getting sort of into weird things here because it's like, how do you compare these guys? But I don't know. That felt a little high for Shockey. Incidentally, and actually, let me throw one more at you. 2 slots up. Plaxico Burress at 46 also felt kind of high because, I mean, Burress really only had what, like one really good season for the Giants, and the following year he shot himself in the leg.
No, he was really good for them in 2005.
Okay, so he was up for okay.
But he was there. He was only there 4 years, and the fourth year he was hurt most of that year before he shot himself.
Uh-huh.
I would tend to agree that that's high. I certainly wouldn't have him above Rodney Hampton, or I guess he's one behind Rodney Hampton. But there's certainly some guys on this that I would put him behind. Otis Anderson, for example. I think he belongs on there and probably as high as you can be for a guy who was only really on the team for 3 years because he was very important to them. But you're right. To be in the top half based on, I mean, he had a great NFC Championship game in 2006 or 2007. He caught the game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl. But, if we're going to go by that criteria, then is David Tyree going to be, should David Tyree be in the top 20 on this list because of the play he made? So, no, I think that is a little bit high. I agree with you. I'll tell you, I don't really have a problem with where Odell Beckham is at 37. The only knock on him would be longevity, but he was in those 4 or 5 seasons one of the best players in football. Again, if you want to tell me he's 5-10 slots too high, that's fine. But I'm sure there would be people who'd be like, "He doesn't even belong on the list."
Mm-hmm.
He got fined a few times. Like he belongs a lot higher on the list, or he belongs on the list and not at number 90. How do you feel about like Tom Landry being at number 55?
I was just looking at that, and the description here, all it says is he was with the Giants as a defensive back from 1950 to 1955. And then the rest of it is all about the fact that he was a coach, an assistant coach for the Giants. And then even that is half about the fact that he coached with Vince Lombardi. So it's like you really kind of let me pull up his numbers.
And just for the record, there's no coaches on here. I mean, no coaches as coaches. They have Steve Owen on there, because he played for the Giants. He must have been there for a while he coached for 22 years or 23 years. But they don't have Bill Parcells on there or Tom Coughlin on there.
He was an all-pro. Now, there's not a lot of defensive stats from the 50s, but he was an all-pro in 54 as a defensive back and punter. So, yeah, that's another one where you got to kind of feel like the name is probably doing some work there. And if in 1955, instead of retiring to go sort of become a coach and become one of the all-time great NFL coaches of all time, if instead of that he'd retired and just gone and sold aluminum siding for the next 30 or 40 years of his life, I don't think there's anywhere the way that Tom Landry would be anywhere near this list.
Yeah, exactly. Which means he shouldn't be on the list. Anything else stick out at you towards the bottom? Jeff Hostetler at number 79. You have any problem with that?
No, you're never going to not have a quarterback who led your team to a Super Bowl somewhere on the list like this. It's kind of like when we did our Mount Rushmores all those years ago of quarterbacks, and you put Nick Foles as one of the 4 all-time Eagle quarterbacks, and it was like he led them to the only Super Bowl they've ever won. You have to have him on there somewhere. So yeah, I don't have a big problem with that. I don't have any problem with it. He had to be on there. He's another one of those guys. It's like if he had been 97, I would have been okay with that too, because he really was only the starting quarterback of the Giants for, I don't know, really just for 91, really, because even in 90, he wasn't the starter. He was hurt. He was a backup, and Sims was hurt. So I would not have a problem with him lower. I would have probably have a problem with him being not on the list at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the Hall of Famers from some of the really early years, guys like Red Badgro and Ray Flaherty, the guy who had been in the news recently because his number 1 was retired, and neighbors reached out to the family to have it unretired. Those guys are on there. It's hard to say whether they are too high, too low, whatever. It's interesting that Flaherty, with sort of the same basic career, not statistically, but basically the same sort of career span with Shockey is number 50 and Shockey's 48. I don't know. Part of me feels like maybe Ray Flaherty deserves to be a little bit higher. Otis Anderson is 51. Again, had he not been the MVP of the Super Bowl, he probably wouldn't be on the list at all because he was mostly a backup running back for his time on the Giants. But really, they definitely, you'd be hard pressed to find a guy from either the 86 or 90 team. And I don't know, you're more of an expert on the 07 and 11 teams, but basically not every starter, but there's more starters than not from. Well, let's just look. How many starters from the 86 team are on this list? Let me just run through them real quick, and then we'll move on to something else here. So Taylor is 1, Carson is 2, Phil Simms is 3, Carl Banks 4, Mark Bavaro 5, George Martin 6, Leonard Marshall 7. Then we got Joe Morris 8, Bart Oates is 9. I guess you'll count Sean Landetta as number 10. Otis Anderson 11. I know he's not a starter, but we're going with it here. Mark Collins is 12. Jim Byrd is 13. Pepper Johnson 14. Gary Reason's 15. Hostetler 16. William Roberts 17. Terry Kennard 18, Eric Howard 19, Brad Benson 20. So 20 guys from the 1986 team. A fifth of the team was on the 1986 team, and that's like almost half the roster of the 86 team. So they definitely took care of the 86 team and the 90 team and those guys.
Yeah, and I think you'd be hard pressed to say they weren't the best Giants team of all time.
Agreed.
It's tough to quantify the teams from the 30s, but from a domination standpoint and the number 1 seed and ran roughshod through the league, certainly more so than any of their 3 other Super Bowl era championships. So not hard to understand why that 86 team is so well represented.
So I want to talk, if you're up for it, I want to talk for a few minutes about the bracket that they put out. And it's certainly not, we're not going to. Did you say something? I'm sorry.
I was going to say, before we get to that, this isn't specifically, but you invoked it and we're talking about the Giants. So numbers, the Giants retired numbers have been in the news lately because Malik Neighbors, their top numbers, the number 6 overall draft pick, their top draft pick, was given number 1, which was unretired, or I guess will be re-retired for Ray Flaherty. Ray Flaherty was on the Giants for 6 years. He wore 3 different numbers. This sort of underscores the arbitrary manner in which the Giants have retired numbers. I'll give you the numbers real quick. So Ray Flaherty, number 1, Tuffy Lehman's number 4, Mel Hine, number 7, Eli Manning, number 10, Phil Simms, number 11, Y.A. Tittle and Ward Cuff, number 14, Frank Gifford, number 16, which happened decades afterwards, Al Blozis, number 32, who his number was retired because he was killed in action in World War II, Joe Morrison, number 40, Charlie Connerly, number 42, Ken Strong, number 50, Lawrence Taylor, number 56, Michael Strahan, number 92. Not on that list would be Roosevelt Brown, who was just ranked number 2 overall in terms of their top players of all time. I don't believe Andy Robustelli's number is retired on that list. We can go. Sam Huff's number is not retired on that list. The Giants have done this very arbitrarily. They weighted the early guys, and I'm not even talking the 50s teams. I'm talking the 30s and 40s guys. They retired way too many of those numbers, which led to an oversampling now where we're at a thing where there's really no single digits available or like 2 single digits available. a lot of teams, there hasn't been wholesale unretiring of jerseys, but a lot of teams do the Ring of Honor kind of thing and don't retire numbers. Although even then, there's limits to that. Like, I don't think the Cowboys have given anybody number 8. I could be wrong. I know they do 88 a lot, but
yeah, but the 88 thing with Dallas is almost something that's become a thing in and of itself, sort of like 32 is for USC football. It's almost more of an honor to be part of the line than it is to have your number retired.
And then, I've heard some people say that, they should unretire basically every jersey except Lawrence Taylor's. And the reason I don't think that's smart is that then invites a lot of discussion, like we talked about Lawrence Taylor's personal life. So I don't think it makes sense to carve out one number to unretire.
Well, also, I mean, they just retired Strahan's and Eli's number like 5 minutes ago. What are they going to say?
And
Never mind, fellas.
That was my original thought when I was thinking of this the other day as I wrote down. I said, take the top 5 on this list, Eli and Strahan. Say we're going to retire these for 10 more years and then unretire them. But that's when I realized, I'm like, oh, a couple of guys in this top 5 don't have their numbers retired.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the answer is, but I know what my answer would be. But I think there's thankfully been not that much. I'm sure Phil Mushnick wrote a column. There hasn't been too much of like how disrespectful to the legacy of, let's be honest, most of the people who be making those comments had no idea who Ray Flaherty was.
Yeah.
So I just figured I would mention that because we talked about the numbers and we're talking about the history of the Giants.
Yeah, I think it's better the way these teams have done it because it's so easy for, and even the Yankees, you look at like how many guys have numbers in the 80s and 90s for the Yankees now because, there have been so many retired between 1 and, 30 or 1 and 40, however you want to look at it. But in the NFL where you dress 53 guys, and that doesn't even count guys who are injured or on the practice squad or whatever. It's so hard to keep. And also the NFL, unlike the other sports, it's not what it once was, but the NFL has number restrictions. And especially like if you're a quarterback, not only do you have to deal with, you come to the Giants, not only do you have to deal with Sims and Eli, and Tittle, who were actually quarterbacks, but then you have to deal with the guys like the Flahertys and the Hines, who were just on the team when anybody guys just more wore those numbers. So I like the fact that they honor the guys. I wish there was a way to have it have been consistent over the course of the last 100 years. And I wish there was a way to not have to unretire numbers because, you're not going to unretire certain guys, but you are going to unretire other guys. And I don't like what, that just can devolve into, but you're right. It's a tough situation no matter how you do it. And I think it's good that these teams have understood that they were this was getting out of hand. And it's like, okay, let's do a Ring of Honor. Let's do a whatever, a Hall of Fame, whatever it is, so that they continue to honor these guys, but they don't get themselves into a weird position with numbers.
And just to sort of close the book on this, and then I have at least one other topic, then we can get to the plays. My solution on this is to just go to 3 digits. This has been the thing I've been harping for years. Nobody's going to explain to me why that's worse than, like, I was at the Army game a couple of weeks ago, and they have 6 guys on their roster who have the same number. Like, yeah, why for some reason is having 6 guys who are number 95 somehow not a problem, but having a guy, like, again, we'll move on. Guys are going to want their area codes. You don't think 305 or whatever the Miami area code is would be a big number? Football, I will concede, has a little bit of a problem where they're going to have to figure out a way to make them readable.
Yeah.
They'll figure that out. They will figure that out. But that's my ultimate point, but we can move on from that.
No, and I tend to agree with that. It's funny, when I used to go to Maryland games, it was the same way. I don't know if you know this, but the guys with the same number can't be on the field at the same time.
Yep.
And I remember one time we were watching where I was at a Maryland game, and the punter had the same number as like the dime back. And I remember turning to my friend and saying, are they putting the punter in on 3rd and 12 to try and then we realized what it was. So yeah, so no, I would agree if you could make it readable, you just, because you figure it took 100 years in these sports to get to this point. If you just do 1 to 999, it's going to take you several more centuries to get to the point where that's untenable. So I don't hate the idea.
I think you're safe. I think you're safe to punt on that as a problem and let that be the space council's problem in 1,000 years or whatever it is.
I think I know what you're going to bring up next, but go ahead.
Uniforms?
Yeah. Did you hate them? I didn't hate them.
No. So the uniforms the Giants wore against the Vikings on Monday, or on Sunday rather. Yeah, would I want them to be even a normal throwback? No. Like I wouldn't want them to be in the rotation because I don't think throwing jerseys, two problems. One, when you throw it back to a time nobody remembers and the only surviving footage is in black and white, I think you lose something. And B, when you make throwbacks to jerseys that don't look like that anymore. So like the helmets, and I know Michigan's kept it for years, but the reason the Giants helmet looked like that in the 1920s was because they were different pieces of leather were painted different colors.
Yeah,
the helmet's not made out of leather anymore. Same thing with and this goes into my larger point. So no, I didn't dislike those. I think jerseys in general for them, their best look ever is the 80s look, especially the whites. Those are the best look ever.
I kind of like the 50s look a little more, but okay.
For the whites?
No, for the blues. The blue 50s jerseys.
But so which is similar to their current ones.
Similar, yeah.
Yeah, my problem with the white and red that they wear now, and yes, they won 2 Super Bowls when they wore them. A, they're big blue, and they've been big blue for a long time. I know they wore those in the 50s, but that's a long time ago. And B, the coolest thing about those 50s jerseys was the stripes. Football jerseys don't have stripes anymore. Very few of them do. So when you see them, a linebacker with those red stripes where 3/4 of them are tucked under his shoulder pad anyway, it's just a white jersey with red numbers, a team with a blue helmet. So that's that.
Now, are they going to wear the throwbacks? It was last week the only week.
I believe that was it. I don't know if they had planned on maybe once more, but because of the negative feedback to them, they decided not to. But I think that's going to be it.
And this might not post for a couple weeks, and who knows what the situation will be. But it's also hard to separate the uniforms from how they played and how terrible they were.
I would also be fine, by the way, if the team wore the same uniforms but with entirely different players wearing. That would be fine as well.
All right, so I think the last thing we want to talk about is the bracket, and we're not going to go through this in any sort of extreme way, but basically they put out a 64 moment bracket, and it was, individual matchups with the fans voting, and unlike the top 100 list, you can definitely pick up the recency bias. There was a red bracket, a blue bracket, a gray bracket, and a white bracket. The final 4 was the Victor Cruz 99 yards. That was the Christmas Eve game against the Jets in 2011.
Yes, and that play is significant in the history of both franchises in New York because really nothing has gone right for the Jets since then.
You also had the Tyree catch against the Patriots in Super Bowl 42. You had the Odell Beckham one-handed catch on the Sunday night against Dallas in, what was that, 14?
Yeah, probably.
And then the Eli to Mario Manningham sideline catch in Super Bowl 46 against the Patriots. So in the 100 years of the Giants, you didn't have a moment that was any more than 17 years old. And I'm looking here. I'm actually having a hard time finding the winner here. I'd imagine it had to be the helmet catch at Tyree, but why am I?
Yeah, I'm having a tough time too. I think
unless
go ahead.
Unless the voting's not still going on, is it? I thought they ended this. Okay. I see the little note on the side here. It says David Tyree's helmet catch has been voted the greatest play in Giants history. I don't know if they did sort of a 2-on-2 bracket or if they just did the final four, but Tyree's helmet catch, the greatest play in Giants history, taking that on its own, that probably is right, I would say. I mean, it's one of the
playing football.
It might be one of the best 2 or 3 plays in NFL history. So yeah, it belongs on that list.
So that's the answer. Like, we can talk about recent, and by the way, all 4 of the plays on here are great plays. But the David Tyree helmet catch, first of all, it's a double play. Eli Manning escapes from basically being sacked, resets his feet. Eli Manning, who's not the most evasive quarterback in his career, resets his feet, throws the ball down the middle of the field, and David Tyree catches the ball with one hand and his helmet, while Marvin Harrison, the all-pro, is draped all over him and makes the catch with 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl. It is not overrated in any way. It is not recency bias in any way. It is a mind-boggling play that still surprises me every time I watch it, because as he goes back, I still think it's going to hit the ground behind him every single time. It is clearly number one, no question. Number 2 is not close. Whatever number 2 is not close.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, here's what I'm going to say about this. Let me start with sort of the one that I think is the least deserving here. And there's the brackets right there. The Knicks, or I'm sorry, the Crews, the Crews 99-yarder against the Jets. I don't think that in any way belongs in the Final Four. Now, that was a nice play, don't get me wrong, but it was a regular season game. You're talking about a team that's won, 8 NFL championships. There's tons of moments in there that could belong over that. Let me just list some of the other things that were in that bracket. And again, it's hard because especially when you go back far, it starts to go into sort of whole performances rather than just a particular, one particular play from scrimmage. But let me just give you some of the games that were on that same, some of the things that were on that same list. You have Joe Danowski in the 1938 NFL title game, which was a giant win. You have Andy Robustelli's performance in the 56 NFL title game, which was a giant win. If you want to go even, a little more modern into the 90s, you have Eric Howard's fumble forcing of against Roger Craig that Lawrence Taylor recovered in the 91 NFC title game. And then in that same NFC title game, you have Matt Barr's game-winning field goal over the 49ers to end the three-peat. You have Tynes' 07 winner against Green Bay in the NFC title game. So you've got, and I know a lot of these that I named were game-winning field goals, but all of those to me are head and shoulders above a regular season catch against the Jets, 99 yards, though it may have been.
So you have a tough situation with plays because, and this is one where I really can't blame people for not voting for plays from the 30s because it's very tough to see.
Agreed.
To the extent that there is footage, it's not great. It's tough to quantify. You have to almost, like when you say a play, are we just talking about a historical significance? Are we talking about the difficulty of the play? It's easy with Tyree because that's a mix of both. But while the Crews play was a very, very significant play in what was essentially a playoff, it was week 16. If the Giants lost, they would have been eliminated from the playoffs. They won that week. They won the next week. They won 4 playoff games. They won the Super Bowl. It was a very significant play. but it was, and the same thing with it, like, so Matt Barr's game winner in San Francisco was a medium-sized field goal. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But it carried the Giants to the Super Bowl and their biggest upset until Super Bowl 42 in the history of the franchise.
Yeah, and it's not like a 99-yard touchdown reception is something super incredible. Like you run fast, you get past the guys. I mean, I couldn't do it, but like it's not like it was some sort of incredible feat of athleticism.
No, I mean it was a huge play. But like I look at the final four from that bracket, the Tynes 07 winner was an incredibly difficult kick in those conditions and historically significant. The Barr kick was incredibly historically significant, if not incredibly difficult from a condition standpoint. And then I see Jason Sehorn's pick versus Philadelphia, which was in a playoff game, and also was an incredibly athletic play. Now, it was in the first half. It didn't win them the game, but it was a game they won. So that's why I have a tough time with these. But no, of those three, of those ones that made the finals, I would probably pick the Tynes game winner.
Yeah. I would pick the Barr field goal. Well, I guess you said that didn't make the finals, but yeah.
Oh, it's in the final four. I'm going by the final four of that bracket.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, and look, again, you're right. I would like it if things from 1938 were given equal weight. We know they're not going to, and so I do take that with sort of a grain of salt in mind, but you're right. Even if you put that aside, I can't justify the Knicks thing. Now, the other one that I wanted to get your thoughts on, and I think we might be a little bit in disagreement here. I can't necessarily, or I can't justify, and if anybody's following at home, I think this is the blue bracket. I can't justify that Beckham catch. I don't know. I just can't do it. Like, it was a great play, but on a team that was mediocre, because they didn't make they were not a playoff team that year. When it's up against championship moments and that type of thing, I'd have to go with something else. There's an Imani Toomer catch against the Packers in the 08 playoff, the 07 playoffs. There's a Hakeem Nicks play against the Packers in the 11. There's that famous Mark Bavaro against the 49ers on Monday night. There's Ingram on the 3rd and 13 against Buffalo in Super Bowl 25. I don't know. To me, what Beckham did was great, but there's no question what Giant fans are going to remember better.
Again, though, this falls into what do you consider?
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
From a greatest play standpoint, like highlight play, it's the second best play I'm aware of that the Giants have ever had.
Yeah,
I would still put the helmet catch over it, but I mean that catch is in terms of degree of difficulty, it's inconceivable. Now, yeah, they lost that game, which I get tired of people bringing up. It's one of those, nobody remembers they lost that game. Everybody remembers they lost that game. But no, would I have voted for it to go that high? No, but again, I don't know that I'm being fair with that because it's the greatest plays. It's not what play do you like the most. You know what I mean? It's a very amorphous.
It is.
It's a very amorphous thing to sort of quantify. I think the 3rd and 13 would probably be the play I would pick in that final four bracket there.
Probably same here.
Would be because that was a big play. It was sort of a will as opposed to athleticism play. It was at a huge point in that game, and it was not a play you see a lot of. He didn't break through 8 guys. He didn't run past them. He kind of wrestled with 4 different guys and got past them each. So
yeah, and if you're not familiar, we're talking about Mark Ingram's 3rd and 13 play against the Bills on was that their game-winning field goal drive, or was that the
that was
that was when they went up that was when they went up 19 to that was when they went up 17-12, right? Yeah. So in Super Bowl 25, which is a subject of an early Hello Old Sports episode, that Giants Bills Super Bowl of God, now 34 years ago at this point, which is just crazy to think about. So yeah, I mean, I think they put a good bracket together. I think the fan voting was predictably not good and just completely, totally just recency bias, but it's cool that they did it nonetheless.
And just before we go on that, that Manningham play is in a lot of ways a better football play.
Mm-hmm.
It was a perfect throw. It was a perfect catch. He dragged his feet. Everything about that was like, nobody's going to watch film of the helmet catch and be like, okay, this is what we have to do. Like you're not going to show that as an example of perfect execution on any way. You're not going to go like, all right, let's try to run that play the Giants ran in the Super Bowl where the guy caught the ball against his helmet. That Manning to Manningham play 4 years later is like the perfect example of what you want to do in that situation.
That is one that I could theoretically get there on that one. They don't really have the earliest moment in that bracket is from 1961. So there's nothing like super early there that maybe is underrated. There's a couple plays from Super Bowl 21 that are in that bracket, including the catch where Bavaro deflected the ball to Phil McConkey, and Phil McConkey caught the touchdown pass. And for some reason, the Giants' own website spells McConkey McConkey, which is an error. There's nothing really sort of great playoff moments here. There's Plaxico's game winner is in that bracket, but in 42, but that in and of itself was not a particularly exciting play. They just got open and threw a touchdown pass. So I could get there with you on the Manningham one. So I'm actually okay with 2 of the 4 semifinalists being from 2007 on, but the other 2 needed to make room at least for something from the Parcells years.
Mm-hmm. Now let me ask you one last question. Should the Norwood kick be on the bracket somewhere?
And it's not, is it?
I don't believe so.
I don't think it is. The
Giants didn't really do anything on that play, but
yeah, I'm trying to look here. It's not in this one. It's not. Is it in the gray? It does not seem to be in the gray. Let's go to the red. No, I don't believe it's anywhere. It's not there. And then I think I got one more to check here. Check the blue. It's not there either. Yeah, no, I would say it's just so hard because it's like the only thing in sports that's not where the other team, even if the other team is winning a championship. I mean, I guess you could say if like a guy missed a wide open 3 or something that would have won his team the title and the other team wins, that's not a great moment for the team that won. But yeah, it's very strange that maybe one of the biggest actual moments of emotion in franchise history was not there. So yeah, I mean, should it be there on a team that's had so many great moments through 100 years? I'm okay with it not being, but I recognize what somebody would say it might be a little strange that it's not.
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
So, there are people don't realize, I think in New York, they're definitely in the shadow of the Yankees, and in the NFL, there's teams that have had the Giants never had a dynasty, right? So they're not the Packers, they're not the Cowboys, they're not the Steelers, they're not the 49ers, they're not the Patriots, but it's hard to match the Giants for sort of a sustained, and they've had some dark years, don't get me wrong, but it's hard to match them for sort of a sustained over the last 100 years being good, a lot more than they've been bad.
Yeah, I guess in the last 100 years, yes.
So we thought it would just be fun to kind of hop on for a couple of minutes and kind of react to what they did and maybe validate some of what the Giants did. And I think we're both in agreement that the experts got the top 100 better. They got that right more than the fans got the 64 bracket right.
Oh, for sure.
Real quick before we go, best Giant coach of all time. You got to figure it's Parcells, right?
Yeah, I would think so. Really, the ones who would be in the discussion would be him, Coughlin, and Steve Owen.
You'd put Steve Owen there just based on longevity, but
I mean, he won 3. When he wasn't the coach at 27, but they're the only ones who won multiple championships. But I think it is Parcells. I think it is Parcells, but I think Coughlin may measure up a little more in terms of success than you would think.
Yeah, I think the thing about the difference maybe, and this is maybe a little bit of a hair split, is that other than 07 and 11, there were a lot of years in there where the Giants were maybe not among the elite of the league, whereas most years in the 80s, the Giants were, considered one of the best teams in the NFL in the 80s. Do you know who the coach was in 27?
No.
Earl Pottigier.
Okay.
So, all right. Well, this was fun. Talk a little Giants football and just kind of, reminisce as the football season started about 100 years of Giants football. Incidentally, if you want a lot more of this, Darren Hayes, the Pigskin Dispatch, I think is doing like 60 episodes about the 100 years of the Giants. So check him out if you want a lot more than what you got from us tonight. But at least we can say that we are two authentic Giant fans who are very interested in the history of the team.
And that's all we have at the moment.
The history. That's a good point. Well, maybe by the time this posts, they'll be like 4-1 or 3-1 or something, and you'll have to eat those words.
Going to take that long to edit?
All right. Well, we'll be back soon with a little bit of a more traditional episode, but this was fun tonight, and we appreciate you all joining us. Enjoy the Giants' 100th season, and until next time, I'm Dan Newman.
And I'm Andrew Newman. Goodbye, old sports.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude. And I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website, seriously, all you got to do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you got to do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.